These scenes in the South China Sea are becoming more frequent. Confrontations between China and the Philippines have escalated in recent weeks. The Philippines accuses the Chinese Coast Guard of firing water cannons at a small ship carrying supplies to military personnel at the second Thomas Shoal. Manila also says Beijing installed floating barriers to close off entry to the island. But China claims these measures are legitimate against what it calls the forced intrusion of Philippine ships. China claims large parts of the South China Sea, including the Spratly and Paracel Islands. But the Philippines says it violates maritime zones based on the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea.
China out of Philippine waters!
A 2016 tribunal in The Hague ruled Beijing's territorial claims were not valid. Yet China has built military bases on the disputed islands, carried out naval patrols, and drilled for oil and gas to solidify its claims.
This is not recognized by any country, any international body, certainly not by the Philippines.
And the sea is a lifeline for the region and beyond. 21% of global trade passes through the South China Sea. It's also believed to be rich in minerals and natural resources. And the livelihood of millions depend on fishing activities, with half of the world's fishing vessels operating in those waters. The US has also increased its military presence in the region to counter China. The Philippines' years-long pro-Beijing policy has shifted under President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Manila has restored its defense ties with Washington, giving the US military access to new sites across the country. While the historic dispute over the South China Sea is heating up, can the sides find a middle way, or is the region getting closer to a military conflict?
Well, I tend to agree that the potential for conflict is much closer at this point, simply because of the way that China has steadily escalated its interactions with the Philippines, especially in the past year or so. What we've seen is that while the Philippines has steadily deployed 4 vessels to this derelict vessel attempting to resupply and rotate personnel there, China has been increasing to now 40 vessels or more than 40 vessels at the last incident. No? And it has also been much more forceful in its interactions, moving well beyond mere warnings to dangerous maneuvers, to using lasers and high-intensity water cannon. Several Philippine personnel have now been injured amidst destruction of a clearly unarmed and technically inferior vessel. It's a wooden vessel. So President Marcos announced that the Philippines will take proportionate, deliberate, and responsible response with the help of the international community against these actions, which he has called illegal, coercive, aggressive, and dangerous.
Right. So, Jukindo, we are where we are now. You've heard the various arguments that contrast with China's claims here. So, where do you see now the diplomatic opportunities to de-escalate this? And again, please say where China might be willing to compromise, because taking 88% isn't going to work out for China, according to the others who want their claims respected as well.
As we said, there's a key word here, claim. The Philippines claim, the Chinese claim, or the Vietnamese claim, the Malaysians claim. It's really about, national sovereignty claim. The good thing is, we are not seeing, military takeover of whatever they claim. I think that's something probably we can take as comfort. The Philippines, took 8 of those islands in 1970s, and in 1980s they began to basically build, airports or airstrip over there, military outposts over there. In 1999, they parked this old Navy ship there. Several times they promised to move away these warships. But the Chinese government do allow the supply, let's say, on humanitarian consideration, supply of food and other supplies. But the problem is, they send the building materials, basically with the purpose of building a permanent outpost, a military outpost likely there, and then it becomes part of the Philippines. So the Chinese government will do whatever it takes, except for, military means to stop such action. That's what we are seeing now. We call it, quote unquote conflicts probably right now. So yes, I would agree, the two sides should talk to each other. Let's bring back diplomacy. Let's bring back discussion. the Chinese government has actually made a proposal, several proposals to discuss, to open high-level discussions with the Philippine side, but they are not well received. There are basically no response from the Manila side.
This instantly recognizable species lives in tropical South Asia, and it's not so far from extinction. There are only around 4,000 Bengal tigers left, down from 100,000 in 1900, but at least their numbers are stable. Red pandas, vaquita porpoises, Javan and Sumatran rhinos are some of the other large animals on the brink of extinction worldwide. And iconic species like the Yangtze pink river dolphins and the Tasmanian tiger have already gone forever. In fact, in the last 100 years, over 400 vertebrate species have been lost. And today, nearly 1 million species, both animal and plant, are under threat.
And then there are lots of species, individual species and habitats that are suffering so significantly that they'll go to extinction. Extinction is permanent, right? So at various scales, there are all kinds of irreversibly.
It's not the first time in our planet's history. Since plants began appearing on land around 500 million years ago, 5 great extinction events have changed the face of life on Earth. Scientists describe the current human-caused species loss as the 6th and fastest mass extinction. The United Nations University says that intense human activities, such as changes in land use, overexploitation, climate change, pollution, and the introduction of invasive species, are some of the reasons for the extinction acceleration. Scientists warn that biodiversity loss leads to unstable ecosystems, which in turn accelerates species extinction, and that puts humans under threat. It increases the threat of disease transmission, threatens food security, and potential medicine resources. In 1993, the United Nations designated May the 22nd as the International Day for Biological Diversity. But it wasn't until nearly 30 years later, in 2022, that nations finally adopted the so-called Biodiversity Plan. Under the agreement, they pledged to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030. It also commits governments to a global target to conserve at least 30% of land, inland waters, and oceans worldwide.
We are acknowledging that protecting the natural world represents the sum of many efforts by governments, by businesses, and by us, each one of us as individuals and consumers. The new GBF is remarkable because we know our means of implementation now will be stronger, and it includes more financing on the table, especially for developing countries.
So, 2 years in and 6 years to go, how much progress is being made? There is pushback in the European Union from already cash-strapped farmers who are now being forced to comply with directives to put aside land for biodiversity. And do humans really care enough about biodiversity, or is the plan set to go the same way as the pledge to keep the world under 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming?
To compare the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis as if they're two separate crises is already a problem. So the fact that we think that we can talk about the climate crisis and we can go to those COPs and have big international conferences as if we're going to fix it without sorting out our destruction of nature is a total fallacy. It's a total fantasy. And in some ways, the United Nations process that separates fixing biodiversity and fixing the climate into two parts is what has led to this artificial division, and as a result, to a certain degree, the sense in the public that climate is the big issue and we just need to focus on that. But the two things are inextricably linked. The destruction of nature has led to far more carbon going into the atmosphere. It's removed the ability of natural ecosystems, both on land and sea, to absorb carbon. And moreover, even if we were to artificially fix the climate crisis, say with artificial carbon drawdown, the collapse of the web of life, the loss of our wildlife, is a far greater existential threat. I think one of the reasons that we might be stumbling on this is that to deal with the biodiversity crisis is a much bigger philosophical ask. It requires us to realize that we as humans can't just fix everything mechanistically. We actually have to realize that we are just one species amongst many other. And that is a big ask for us to get down from our pedestals.
The entire international community could be doing a great deal more to help the situation there, not just in terms of providing humanitarian aid to all of those affected by the ongoing conflict, but also in increasing their sanctions on aviation fuel and that kind of thing. The military have increased their use of fighter jets against their own people exponentially in the last couple of years. And it's at a height right now.
I mean, there's ASEAN, there's China, there's Western sanctions you're talking about that could put significant pressure on the junta. Where are you seeing maybe the best effort made and the worst efforts made? Who's failing?
I'd have to say everybody's failing at the moment, I'm afraid.
But who would you want? Who really does have
China, being one of the most powerful neighbours, if not the most powerful neighbour, could do a lot more.
Student protests have rocked Bangladesh. They started weeks ago over the quota system for government jobs. It was first introduced in 1972, but abolished by Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's government in 2018 following protests. But last month, a court reinstated the system. Based on the quotas, 30% of government jobs are reserved for the children and grandchildren of freedom fighters in the 1971 Independence War. So-called backward groups, women, minorities and the physically disabled share 26%, leaving only 44% to be allocated on merit. Protesters demanded all quotas except the last two be scrapped.
Many talented students are leaving Bangladesh, and one of the main reasons is this quota system. A country where 56% in government jobs is reserved for the entitled people, where there is no place for deserving people.
They also say the quota for the relatives of war veterans favours the supporters of the ruling Awami League, which led the country's independence movement. Under Sheikh Hasina's reign, Bangladesh has seen significant economic growth, but since the COVID-19 pandemic, the economy has been faltering. Inflation is hovering at around 10%, and job growth has stagnated. And youth unemployment is a big problem. An official survey conducted last year shows nearly 40% of Bangladeshis between the ages of 18 and 29 were not working or studying. And despite the past economic successes, income inequality has deepened.
My son passed his higher secondary exam and I'm educating him so that he can get a job. The reason we are joining them is so that if our children have the merit, they will get the jobs. But now children of freedom fighters who have no merit get the job easily.
Last week, the demonstrations turned violent after the Awami League's student wing attacked the protesters in Dhaka University. The government responded with force. Hasina deployed the army, imposed a curfew and shut down internet services. More than 140 protesters have been killed in one of the worst episodes of violence the country has seen.
They are firing openly. 3 of my brothers are already dead at the hospital. A bullet hit the head of another brother and I just brought him to the hospital. See, there are blood stains on my hands. Why are my hands colored with blood of my brothers?
But after days of unrest, protesters won a partial victory after the Supreme Court scrapped most of the quotas on Sunday. Speaking a day after the ruling, Hasina said the situation will improve slowly. She also blamed the opposition Bangladesh Nationalist Party and Jamaat-e-Islami Party and their student organizations for the violence.
Shibir is a militant group. It was the attacks of the militants. They slit the throat of a man and left him around the Dhaka college. He was a normal worker. He used to vote for us. Who cut the throat? They also cut the hands, legs. They also killed the Jatra League men, throwing them from a roof. Who did these heinous things? Jamaat is also militant, and the BNP, their real face also came out.
An uneasy calm returned to Dhaka on Monday. But despite the scaling back of job quotas, the economic and political anger against Sheikh Hasina's rule might prove harder to quell.
Problem is the autocratic regime. What they're happening for last 15 years, without there is no accountability, there is no election, proper election, there is no proper mandate. This makes them so autocratic mentality, and I would say because of that, a small protest turned around a whole country anger. If you look at this international media and human rights organizations, they have reported that country is whole anger. And what began, like we have seen, like you, a peaceful demonstration on university campus against a quota system only. In just 5 days, hundreds of students and opposition activists have been killed. The government has made it increasingly difficult to obtain even information by shutting down internet.
We've said that in the introduction as well, but I can tell Sultan Mahmoud had a lot to say to your position.
UN Secretary General,
Mohammed, let me just let Sultan Ahmed respond quickly. Very quickly, Sultan Ahmed, I could see
it was a elected government, elected by the people of Bangladesh. They had the mandate of entire people. They did not, the BNP and Jamaat, they didn't have it. They did not, the BNP didn't contest any election. So how can you say that the government was not constitutional government? First thing, those who think that the government is not constitutional, they are unconstitutional in every respect and in every kind. And they created this agitation and this massacre in the whole country.
The first day in a year of dark days. On October the 7th, 2023, Hamas and other armed groups launched unprecedented attacks on Israel. More than 1,100 people were killed and 251 taken hostage. Many captives are still being held. Israelis were left stunned, traumatized, and angry. The army's retaliation was swift. Entire neighborhoods in Gaza were laid to waste within 48 hours.
This building was hit by several bombs. Some people were killed, others were injured, including children.
In those early days, critical infrastructure was destroyed, and Israel cut water and power to Gaza.
Almost 100,000 people had fled from northern part, eastern part of Gaza, seeking shelter on Norway schools. I think we cannot even move from our places. We cannot even secure ourselves as a humanitarian actor to start deliver assistance to others. Add to that another shortage of water, electricity, and good supplies, medical supplies. It's going to be a tragic situation.
It proved to be an accurate prediction. Israel's war on Gaza has killed approximately 42,000 people. The majority are women and children. Hospitals in Gaza turned into battlegrounds. The largest, Al-Shifa, reopened its emergency department last month. The Israeli army said Al-Shifa was really Hamas HQ, an accusation that the group and the hospital deny. In April, the month after Israeli raids at Al-Shifa, mass graves were discovered at the site. More shallow graves were uncovered at the Nasser hospital in Gaza City.
The hallmark of Israel as we see it today in Gaza and Lebanon and elsewhere is that it totally ignores international law. It totally ignores the advice of its biggest supporter, which is the United States. And it totally disregards humanitarian constraints in place to protect civilians. It's a runaway killing machine.
Claims like that need hard evidence to back them up. Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur, says it exists.
I find that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the threshold indicating the commission of the crime of genocide against Palestinians as a group in Gaza has been met. Specifically, Israel has committed 3 acts of genocide with the requisite intent: causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, and imposing measures intended to prevent birth within the group.
It's for the International Court of Justice in The Hague to decide whether it agrees with her assessment. South Africa brought a case before the court in December accusing Israel of genocide. Since then, the court's ordered Israel to take a series of measures to mitigate against that outcome. But with its expanding military campaign, Israel's acting in open defiance of those and other rulings. Many of these people have been displaced multiple times already. They're making their way towards Han Yunis.
All the shelling is frightening. The children are scared. We have no place left to stay. This is the 7th time we've been displaced, going from one place to another. We're exhausted. How much longer will it go on?
No one knows the answer to her question. What we do know is that a year on, many Israeli hostages are still missing, and there's no respite for Palestinians in Gaza.
Any actor, a state actor, an individual, a corporation, gets used to breaking the rules, acting in this way, and not having any cost or consequence, then that is the very worst lesson that can be sent. And therefore, those who claim to be Israel's best friends are actually driving Israel off a cliff, because the message that they have sent Israel for decades is do your worst, it's okay. And they have doubled down, and this is the US in particular, in sending that message. And the only way that Israeli Jews will have safety and security is if Palestinians and the region understands that there is an Israeli Jewish population that can live with equality, but not in a regime of ethnic supremacy. But Israel has gotten used to this idea that they are the victim, that they are indulged, and that anything goes. And it doesn't. And I really hope that you won't see that that lesson eventually is learned the hard way. And I hope that the diplomatic, political avenues open. But to open them, let's be clear, first there will have to be accountability and sanctioning of Israel for these violations, and then maybe there will be room for a different conversation.
Well, the Kremlin certainly wants to feel that something is on the precipice. I don't think we're feeling anything that would be substantially different from everything we've experienced so far. Vladimir Putin is once again using nuclear blackmail to try to ward off anyone and everyone who wants to continue supporting Ukraine. I believe that, once again, as evidence that this is part, for the course and much of the same, is Vladimir Putin really does not need any sort of official change to the nuclear doctrine. He rules his country by diktat, by fiat. He doesn't need any of this. This is obviously a message for the outside world.
Okay, let me ask Vyacheslav if that's what you think it is. Is it nuclear blackmail? I mean, would Russia really employ its nuclear arsenal in this war?
I don't think that Russia will ignore international law. First of all, that all this Russian doctrine on nuclear doctrine is restricted by international law and their obligations to the United Nations Declaration and to our relations with the West as a whole. I don't think that this is joke about the nuclear bomb. It is not nowadays. I have any reasons. Russia begins using such kind of weapon of mass destruction. I exclude it absolutely.
I think now his challenge as a transitionary or hopefully head of state is to ensure as a number one priority that the security of all Syrians is guaranteed. I think one of the main factors that has caused the destabilization of the Syrian state is the fact that it just was allowing way too many foreign and domestic actors to roam free, some willingly, some against its will. But I think that is the new sort of logic that will have to be implemented by Bashar and his government and his appointed government. That the state naturally has to monopolize violence and it has to bring all factions together.